Captain Mattingly, you were up in space 10 years ago on a moon mission. What are you most looking forward to in returning to space?
Oh, I think that space flight is a very exciting thing. I think one of the kicks that I'm going to have is seeing how much fun Henry has, because I know how much fun it is, and he thinks he knows, but he doesn't know yet just how much fun he's going to have.
You have been in the space program since 1966, and now after all those years, you're finally going to get your chance to go up into space. What are your emotions?
Well, I feel a great deal of satisfaction, and I feel like I'm within reach of achieving something which I've worked for a long, long time.
Was there any frustration during all those years, the thought, gee, I might not make it into space?
Oh, yes, that thought did cross my mind occasionally, and I wouldn't be totally candid if I didn't say there were some times that things looked pretty bleak. It looked like everything was just a little further away than I really wanted it to be.
Let's talk a little bit about you, Tim. Ken Mattingly, give me a thumbnail sketch of Henry Hartsfield.
It's not fair.
Well, you'll get your chance.
Oh, okay, that's fair.
No, what can you say? Hank and I have known each other for, I don't know how many years now. He makes doing our job, which takes a lot of hours out of every day, a lot of fun. I think we probably have more chuckles during a day, although I couldn't tell you what it was about. I couldn't tell you what it was, but Hank's a master of one-liners and puns and sees humor in things.
I think that I could come up with several adjectives that I could use to describe Ken, one of which is intense. He's one of the most intense individuals I've ever known, as far as concentrating totally on a task and working it as hard as he can. And that's a good characteristic. It's not present in everybody. And also he laughs good about jokes.
You say the jokes. I want to hear one of your jokes.
Well, make him laugh. Well, they have to be spontaneous. I don't know. I just see humor sometimes in things.
Well, tell the Orville and Wilbur joke that you were telling before, because it says a little bit about how you guys feel about the spotlight.
Well, it's a story I heard. I haven't been able to verify it's true or not, but I read it somewhere that Wilbur and Orville were rather shy. They didn't like to make speeches to
the Wright brothers.
The Wright brothers, yes. And the banquet somewhere that was dragging on, they asked, I forget which one, they asked, for example, Wilbur to speak, and Wilbur got up and says, Orville always speaks for us, and he sat down. So they called on Orville to speak, and he says, Wilbur just made the speech, and he sat down.
That's probably a pretty good joke up on the top of the Space Shuttle.
Late at night, it gets even better.
You were scheduled to land on the 4th of July.
Yes, sir.
Does that have any special meaning for you?
As to me, I think it's pretty exciting to fly around the 4th of July. I love my country. I believe in it strongly. I've done limited traveling around the world, but and observed other countries. And I know our country's not perfect, but it sure beats the heck out of whatever's second. It's the only place I want to live. You may notice our patch has got red, white, and blue in it, and it's got the 4 in it, the 4th flight, and it's also the 4th of July. And it all fits together real nice.
Gentlemen, best of luck.
Thank you, sir.
Safe journey.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Columbia will be checked out thoroughly. One end will be baked and the other frozen by turning it tail to the sun for several days. There will be a prototype space factory in the cabin, which the astronauts hope will separate blood chemicals hundreds of times better in weightless space.
The monodisperse latex reactor, to determine if large, identical-sized latex microspheres could be manufactured practically and economically in space. Presently, large microspheres cannot be produced in uniform sizes on the ground. Yet medical and industrial applications have already been found in cancer research and treatment, glaucoma research, and for calibration standards in medical and scientific equipment. A unique opportunity to put small, self-contained payloads aboard shuttle on a space-available basis at a very low cost exists in the Getaway Special program. After proving its flight readiness on Flight 3, the Getaway Special was fitted with 10 experiments built by science students from Utah State University and flown on Flight 4.
There's also a military cargo, Defense Department Experiment 82-1 in the payload bay, but it's classified. Mattingly and Hartsfield have strict orders not to show it on television or talk about it.
No, none that I know of. Anything in particular, I guess, that you would care to know about that payload, we'd have to ask DOD.
You really aren't going to talk very much about that, are you?
No, sir. We're in our agreement with the DOD, they are the spokesman for all aspects of the DOD cargo.
Some people might say, isn't it a pity that we go to this new frontier, science, adventure, and that we end up filling it with weaponry, with military equipment?
It's a shame anytime force is involved in resolving disagreements. My role in the Department of Defense as a military officer is to make sure that if and when the force is required, that we're on the winning side.
On Flight 4, the Induced Environment Contamination Monitor was used to check for contamination in and around the payload bay, created by thruster firings, outgassings, and water dumps.
It was quite a scare for a while, but NASA has now had a look at the tile damage caused by the hailstorm out at Pad 39, and indications are there's nothing that can't be fixed so that there can be a scheduled launch on time. Engineers have found some dimples, NASA says they're smaller than dents, in the tiles on the wing and tail. NASA says they can repair that damage, which they call minor, and that it won't hold up the countdown preparations, which have been going smoothly up till now. Vic Ratner, ABC News, at the Kennedy Space Center.
Navy Captain Thomas Mattingly, the commander of the 4th shuttle flight, and pilot Henry Hartsfield, a former Navy man, were awakened right on schedule at 6:10 this morning. After breakfast, they put on their spacesuits, assisted by Joe Schmidt, who is retiring today after helping astronauts get ready since the first manned spaceflight here in 1961. After that, the traditional greetings from NASA workers, and then the ride out to the launch pad.
You see a couple of cats in a pressure suit. This is also the last time that you'll see anybody wearing a pressure suit or using ejection seats. From now on, we're going to be going in shirt sleeve environments. Flight 4 is the last of our flight test programs. This shot of the underside of the vehicle stacked on the pad, one of the most significant things at this point is that we turn this vehicle around from one flight to the next in something on the order of 3 months. That kind of a turnaround rate was done in spite of the fact that we had all of the scrutiny and all of the thoroughness of a flight test program, and yet that same rate will carry us through the ops era for the next couple of years.
As they prepared to enter the hatch, the astronauts found a sign on the wall saying, "Go War Eagles." The War Eagle is the mascot of Auburn University, alma mater for both Mattingly and Hartsfield.
Just prior to this, we had loaded the payload on the pad, which is another first for this part of our mission, and that's going to be one of the ways we streamline the turnaround time for future operations. As Hank mentions, we get ignition on time, much less than a second off the planned trajectory. The engines are controlled in the final count by the onboard computers. We verify that we have good main engines prior to ignition of the solids, which commit you to flight.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. We have main engine ignition. 4, 3, 2, 1. And we have solid motor ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of America's Space Shuttle.
Here the spacecraft is lifting off, going past the tower. Throughout this part of the ride, from this point on, you're looking out Hank's window as we do our roll down range. This is the vehicle turning. It launches with its tail to the south, and then we roll to pick up whatever launch azimuth we need. In our case, a 28.5-degree inclination orbit.
30 seconds, 1 nautical mile in altitude, throttling engines down to 65% now as programmed.
Throughout this part of the mission, I was very impressed that the ride on the shuttle is much like it was in the Saturn. One of the major advantages or differences, I would say, is that you have more acceleration getting away from the pad and the vibration levels are reduced.
We see the vehicle here going through approximately Mach 1. You'll notice that the shock waves start to build up around the nose of the vehicle and the tanks. You can see that quite vividly. We're somewhere over 20,000 feet now, and speed's building very rapidly. This is the region of maximum dynamic pressure. Here's a view taken from the pilot's window as we pop through the atmosphere. It's very dramatic as you get out of the atmosphere, and the sky begins to turn dark very rapidly.
1 minute, 20 seconds. Columbia now 9 nautical miles in altitude, 6 nautical miles downrange. 1 minute, 30 seconds. Columbia now 12 nautical miles in altitude, 9 nautical miles downrange. Velocity now reading 3,900 feet per second. 1 minute, 42 seconds. Coming up now on negative seats where altitude is too high for ejection seat use.
Columbia, Houston, negative seats.
Roger, negative seats.
1 minute, 57 seconds. Columbia now 21 nautical miles in altitude, 21 nautical miles downrange. 2 minutes, 3 seconds. Standing by for solid rocket booster separation.
Roger, PC 50.
Two minutes, 14 seconds. Confirmed solid rocket booster separation. 2 minutes, 20 seconds. Onboard guidance is converging as programmed. Columbia is now steering for a precise window in space.
8.5 minutes from liftoff. We're some 58 nautical miles high and traveling at just under 26,000 feet per second.
Confirm external tank separation. Columbia now moving below and beyond the external tank. Go, no-go status check and mission control by Flight Director Tom Holloway for the first ohms burn and shutting down the auxiliary power units.
Columbia, Houston, your go for nominal ohms 1, APU shutdown on time.
Oh, thank you, David.
Columbia now in proper attitude for the first ohms burn. Prop systems engineer reports ignition on both ohms engine. Looks good. Flight dynamics officer Ron Epps reports the following predicted numbers for the first ohms burn. Time of ignition, 10 minutes, 39.3 seconds. Delta V, 153.5 feet per second. Burn duration, 1 minute, 30.5 seconds. A resulting apogee of 130 nautical miles. A resulting perigee of 33.3 nautical miles. At 14 minutes mission elapsed time, this is Shuttle Control Houston. Recovery forces have not been able to locate either of the twin solid rocket boosters or main parachutes. Initial aircraft sightings indicated that one of the boosters had been located resting low in the water but a report was later received that it apparently sank. Another sighting indicated that the other booster was floating erect in the water, but later reports implied that it too had sunk.
T.K. Mattingly and Henry Hartsfield conducted a thorough evaluation of on-orbit procedures for the upcoming operational era of spaceflight, when Columbia will launch into Earth orbit on a routine basis.
Here's a view taken in orbit as we do one of the OMS burns that I described to you earlier. We did 2 of these burns to get into the 130-mile orbit, 2 more to jack the altitude up to 160, then a 5th one to adjust the entry roll phasing.
Houston, you still there? Roger, TK, we're here. Your burn looks good. I was going to say, things look pretty nice here. The 4th OMS burn was performed as planned. Columbia now in a circular orbit of 161 nautical miles. Experiment Charlie is on. In any event, select Experiment Charlie power off. Verify Experiment Charlie power LED off. Wait 60 seconds and then execute tab Bravo Charlie.
Here's a just brief look at the operation of the continuous flow electrophoresis system. This is a prime example of an experiment or an operation that can only be performed in zero-G efficiently. It must have the space environment. The principle of operation is that biological materials assume their own inherent charge in the presence of an electric field, and that serves as a basis for separating these materials. This can only be done now in the laboratory, and only very small quantities of biological materials that can be used in the treatment of disease can be separated in this fashion. It could be done with a static device, but to increase the yields, you need continuous flow. The principle being to put the biological materials in solution, pass them between the electrodes of an electric field. The molecules with a larger charge would then have the largest lateral displacement in the field as the flow proceeded. Now, the big enemy of doing this on Earth is gravity. Gravity limits how much or how concentrated the solution is with the materials you're trying to separate, because the solution must keep it in, must hold it up, and in gravity, if you get the concentration too high, it won't hold it. Gravity also plays a part in convection. As the fluid is heated by the electric field, convection currents set up, which destroy the purity of the sample being gathered and also affects the quantity that you can separate. In the space environment, you can increase the yields several hundred times over what you can do on Earth. And this is extremely important, because then this allows us to generate clinical quantities rather than just experimental quantities. In the future, we may very well have factories producing biological materials using this same technique. And again, I say the importance is that it can only be done in a space environment where there's no gravity or very little gravity. The device is run, a little microcomputer. Here we see the pilot making an input into that computer. The big factor here is the cost. To produce the same amount of material on Earth as we can produce in orbit under a comparable period of time would cost a fortune. So space use of this type of device is going to reduce the cost and make the materials available. This is the first of 6 flights flying this device under a joint agreement between NASA and the contractor. Our first results show that this device worked very well, and the results are very promising.
Results from the prototype's first flight showed that a very thin, yet highly concentrated stream of protein substance on the left was separated from red dye on the right. The thin protein stream, only a portion of which is shown here, is actually over 43 inches long and is 300 to 400 times more concentrated than yields obtained from the same process on Earth.
Columbia, this is Sunnyvale. How do you read?
Fine, clear.
We would like you to go to panel L11 and watch the cover and its open LED.
Columbia, this is Sunnyvale. How do you read? Over. Okay, you're very weak, so speak slowly, sir.
At 061730, LED on.
Okay, and I should be looking for operation during this period, and if I see it successfully, you want me to leave it alone, or you want me to still go to override?
Roger, sir. We'd like you to go ahead and go to override in either case.
Good enough to hold up these cameras. They aren't quite in the side of the mast, and so during the burn, the camera holds these around. You got a beautiful picture of these.
Troubleshooting procedure for the Getaway Special.
According to my understanding, I have 1 more minute of this, and so far we've had no joy.
Alternate methods of anchoring oneself in weightlessness were praised.
Lack of gravity also has some disadvantages in that you must somehow anchor yourself if you want to work in space. Here, the crewman puts his toes under the edges of the locker, and notice he has quite a bit of freedom then to move about without coming loose and floating around.
Columbia, Houston, data on the capture and rigid eyes looks good from down here. You are go for further operations.
On Flight 4, the Induced Environment Contamination Monitor was used to check for contamination in and around the payload bay, created by thruster firings, outgassings, and water dumps. 11 separate components of Shuttle's induced environment were measured. The desk-sized monitor was the heaviest payload lifted by the remote manipulator system during the orbital flight test program.
We tried to activate the Getaway Special, and don't seem to be able to make it work.
Mission Control, Houston, 2 days, 6 hours, 20 minutes mission elapsed time. Ground controllers and mission control and thermal experts have studied indications that they're getting from the spacecraft as to the possible continued presence of water on the underside tiles, and decided to go to a bottom sun attitude again tonight to be sure that they have baked all the water out of the tiles to avoid any possible problems on entry.
It sounds to me like we owe somebody down there a great big cheer. Your little fix for the first try on fixing up the gas, and we got relay 02 and 00 shifted from latent to hot.
Well, that's really great news. You're going to make a lot of folks happy down here. Thank you.
Columbia's Commander Ken Mattingly reporting during the Shargady Pass that he has been successful in the Getaway Special repair, and that experiment canister is now activated.
It's right in the middle of our picture, TK. It looks great.
Yes, sir. That's a familiar sight. I don't know if you can see the SLF on your monitor. It just stands out like it was painted with a big arrow from here. Cam will sweep over and you can pick up things like Lego Okeechobee.
Yeah, I think we can see the SLF.
This is Shuttle Control. Ken Mattingly gave us a live television tour of the Gulf Coast and of Florida, and of the flight and mid-decks of the orbiter Columbia.
An ongoing task on all 4 missions of the flight test program was to evaluate living conditions on board Shuttle. Items included food preparation, use of a food warmer, a freezer on board Flight 4.
One of the things we took a look at in our operational evaluation was some revised packaging of the food system. In order to save weight and space on the spacecraft, we have gone to dehydrating the food, putting it in some plastic containers. Now, Hank is on the left side of the picture putting water in to hydrate it. You mix it up. Since most food tastes better if it's warm or if it's cold rather than ambient, we have this aluminum thing that looks like a suitcase. It's actually a little portable heater. Put the food that has to be warmed in there, and then we'll put it off to the side for 15 or 20 minutes and let it warm up. At the same time, we had a little refrigerator, which we carried for the first time on this flight. Then we could put beverages and things in there that would be cooled. And you put it all together so that you have a hot meal with cool beverages, and it goes a long ways towards making the food a lot more flavorful. And just as it does on Earth, having a good meal does a lot to bring up morale. And when you're working 15 and 16-hour days, that's important.
This is a food warmer, if you hadn't guessed. It's really not a traveling kit. Did you see it turn?
It's affirmative.
What do you suppose that is?
Roger, we're assuming it's airflow in the cabin.
Oh, you get an A.
Guys, we really appreciate your patience with us today. Things got pretty hectic, and you guys really hung in there.
Sure appreciate you watching the store for us. You helped us out a lot today. At least, Mike, we may not have solved my problems, but we thought about them all in advance. We just looked at each other and said, uh-oh. At the time, you came up and called us because I said I want to wait for some daylight. Did you get my comment about verifying that the doors close physically and that without any problem, that it looked like it was the latch mechanism that caused our problem?
Roger, we copied that comment, TK.
Stand by. Mark, close. Okay, they close normally.
TK, everything looks good to us. You can continue with the normal procedures.
Okay, thank you, sir. The two monitors are touched on the right over there. The TV monitors we use to monitor the TVs. To the left of that is the control panel. We control the autopilot. And there's the hand control that we use from the aft station. The one beside the vehicle from the aft station. George, this is a geologist's delight up here. I never had a chance to look at the patterns in Africa before, and you can see the rifts and the fault zones, and you can see all of the various volcanic sequences and trace them. It's really complex and fascinating. It's very much what you see out in some part of the western U.S., but on a much grander scale.
Roger, TK. Wish we could be there. There is a chance of some thunderstorms over South America immediately following our next stateside pass over Venezuela, Colombia, and Brazil. If you have time, you might take a look at those.
Okay, we got some spectacular stuff down around Rio and Buenos Aires the other evening. What was that, Flight Day 2? It was really dramatic, and I think we got 2 mags of that stuff. We dark adapted the cockpit here and been sitting here since sunset trying to see what we can see when dark adapted, which is something we haven't had a chance to do much of. And Henry noticed that the obvious horizon is not the horizon at all, but it's the horizon of the atmosphere. And that he noticed you could see stars set through this apparent horizon and track it all the way down until it was called it by the actual Earth's limb, which is nothing amazing to space-type astronomers when using satellites and all. But then I turned the payload bay TV on it, and Hank and I were able to pick out, he's looking at it visually, and I'm looking at the TV, and I was able to make a tape that records all of that, and it's really impressive.
Roger, TK, we copy. Sounds like fun.
This unique device, designed by a fellow astronaut, allowed the user to monitor his own heartbeat while jogging.
This is using the treadmill that we have on board. The harness that I have around my waist carries most of the load. The shoulder straps carry a small part of it. The bungees that pull down on that harness apply a load of about 160 pounds to my lower legs, which is about my approximate weight. So I'm really getting about a 1G load on my legs. DK got a good run on it this afternoon. We also caught some 16 millimeter of that. The idea of this device is to be able to keep up the muscle tone in the legs and keep the cardiovascular function in good shape such that during entry and also when we return back to the 1G and Earth that the blood will not tend to pool so badly in the lower portion of the body.
One of the devices we liked the most on flight for improving morale was a treadmill. It works exercise works in space just like it does on Earth. Clears your thoughts and makes you ready to charge again. We had a harness that attached to the lower torso, and those bungee cords there applied a force equal to the body weight. So your legs were seeing the same forces they would see in 1G on the surface of the Earth. This was a real morale builder for our flight to be able to use this.
There's also a device that's, I've got a clip on my ear in which I can monitor my heart rate. The little device also keeps up with how many miles, if I get that far, I run, or jog, or walk, or what do you want to call it on this thing. It can keep time for me and how long I was on it. This morning I have calculated that I walked about 6,000 miles. So it's a pretty good device.
A third device we looked at are these little sandals with suction cups on the bottom. We evaluated this for several days during the flight and found them to be very useful. We probably still need to do a little more development on them, but the concept is sound.
We have a picture we'll bring back, and we're not sure who to dedicate it to, but if it comes out, it's a picture of Hank with today's update floating from the middeck, and it makes a rather impressive roll of paper.
Yes, sir. We figured that would get us within field goal range.
All right, that sounds like the winner. I'm just teasing you.
Well, we figured we had 100 yards of paper, and we're on about the 30-yard line going in.
I thought you were going to amend to our summary at the end of the day that we had enough consumables for the remainder of the flight plus extension, except we would have to terminate early because we'd run out of teleprinter paper.
That is a concern.
Columbia, Houston, we've been looking around for something for you to do, but haven't been able to find anything, so we'll just let you finish your meal.
The spacesuit to be used for extravehicular activity on Flight 5 was tried on during Flight 4 to practice the procedure.
This is an example of donning the lower torso of a spacesuit. I'm wearing a liquid-cooled garment that provides cooling when you're outside. The pictures are taken inside an airlock that's in the back of the spacecraft cabin on the middeck. The airlock is something we've never had before. It allows you to go inside, and the hatch you're looking at is an exit into the payload bay where you have the vacuum of space. Inside, you can go in a shirt sleeve environment, don the suit, check it out, and then translate outside without having to depress the major part of the cabin. The purpose for this exercise in STS-4 was to prove that we had good mobility inside the airlock. And you've just seen me put my feet in a set of stirrups that are going to anchor my feet so that I can simulate opening the hatch into the payload bay. This was in preparation for STS-5, where 2 crew members will come inside, close off from the cabin, depress the airlock, and go outside to perform an EVA.
So interesting comments that might surprise folks. The dimension between my heels and my shoulders doesn't seem to have changed a bit. This is a perfect suit fit. I could do anything with it.
Sleeping conditions were evaluated. Use of sleep restraints and a sleeping bag.
DK's been sleeping on the aft flight deck, and I've been sleeping in the mid deck.
Roger, we copy that, Hank.
I've been sleeping in that sleeper tray every night. They're sleeping right along. That's the greatest thing going.
The RMS was utilized in 2 days of our flight. The RMS is a sophisticated device. It works very much like your own arm, in which the brain computes the drive rates for the different joints to make the arm do what you want it to do. In the same fashion, the computer computes the rates with which to drive the arm. Here we see an example of how you can roll a payload about its own longitudinal axis, yet not make it translate. You can do the same thing in similar fashion by causing the payload to go up and down with respect to the orbiter, or we can make the payload go back and forth parallel to its own axes, as you see here, without rotating the payload. So it's a very versatile and useful tool. Here's a shot of an upfire in jet and side firing jets. This is the kind of firings we took the data on, as I told you, with the plume survey. There's one of the small vernier jets firing. We took that picture from the elbow camera on the RMS.
It has a very bright, light blue arc next to every limb, and it has an orange surface, and the sun is just about to pop up, and it's going to overwhelm most everything. And there's a very light blue surface on the outside. It's really a beautiful color to see, and it's not always the same.
My hats are really off to the people who built this spacecraft and made it work. My hats are off to all you people down there that have worked to keep us up there and keep the flight going smoothly.
Spectators came to Edwards Air Force Base from all over the nation and all walks of life to celebrate the nation's 206th anniversary of independence and witness historical events more spectacular than the typical 4th of July fireworks display could ever hope to equal. The 4th landing of Space Shuttle Columbia, world's first reusable spacecraft. Columbia's first landing on a concrete runway, officially ending the orbital flight test program.
Columbia, Houston, have a good burn. We'll see you at Guam at 30.
All right, sir, we're starting number 2.
Roger.
That's looking good.
This is Shuttle Control. We have a C-band radar contact at 183,000 feet. FIDO says Columbia is 10 miles high, slightly south of ground track. Altitude's 164,000 feet. Mach 10.
This is a picture taken at hypersonic speed with a telescope on the California coast. I think that's an illustration of the precision with which our system, both the spacecraft and the ground, have been able to pull off an entry. The entry was very similar to what we've had in the past. The one difference between this and the ballistic approaches is that now you have time to experience the transition between 0G and 1G.
Mach 6.3. Range to go 185. Columbia now about 5 minutes from touchdown at 61,000 feet, Mach 1.3.
Right.
Mach 0.9 at 44,000 feet. Range 23 miles.
Here's a picture taken out of the commander's window as he turns left, coming around on the lake bed. In the center right part of the window is the runway that was used on the lake bed for landing STS-1 and 2. We're turning on around and coming in towards the hard surface runway at the Edwards Air Force Base.
TK, surface winds 240 at 12. Thank you. Turning into a heading lined up with the runway now.
I think it's rather significant that in spite of the fact that a pilot may experience a certain amount of vertigo and the transition to 1G weight effects, but in spite of all that, the system with its information and the training program we have allows you to make a landing that looks like this, which is perfectly routine.
Feet, 282 knots. Into auto land guidance now. Columbia will stay in auto land guidance until 2,500 feet. And Mattingly will take over at 2,500 feet for the landing.
And this thing flies just as solid as a rock.
280 knots at 4,200 feet, 3,000.
We've just passed over the aim point. We're pulling up the nose, and here's where the gear comes down. Now you can see the runway approaching, and from this point on, you just sort of hold everything steady as you come up, check that the gear is down. It's always a good plan. Next thing you do is you come up on the runway, and if you look closely, I think you can see touchdown as it occurs right about there. Approaching the overrun now. It'll touch down about 1,000 feet down the runway at about 195 knots. About this point, Hank calls out that we have 185 and it's time to drop the nose. You can see the elevators wiggling as it controls the rate of the nose coming down. Speed brakes are open, and now we perform a braking test where we try to hold about 9 foot per second deceleration.
Shuttle control here, the unofficial landing time, 7 days, 1 hour, 9 minutes, 40 seconds. To repeat, the unofficial landing time, 7 days, 1 hour, 9 minutes, 40 seconds.
Columbia, Houston, if you get a cabin or PPO2 message, disregard.
Okay, we got a couple of those.
Columbia, Houston, welcome back to Earth. That was beautiful.
That's quite a ride.
I think the fact that we can go out and do all of this in public is a real tribute to our entire system.
With Shuttle Pathfinder Enterprise as backdrop, the announcement of America's new space policy by President Ronald Reagan.
In the early days of our republic, Americans watched Yankee clippers glide across the many oceans of the world, manned by proud and energetic individuals, breaking records for time and distance, showing our flag and opening up new vistas of commerce and communications. Well, today, I think you have helped recreate the anticipation and excitement felt in those home ports as those gallant ships were spotted on the horizon heading in after a long voyage. The fourth landing of the Columbia is the historical equivalent to the driving of the Golden Spike, which completed the first transcontinental railroad. It marks our entrance into a new era. The test flights are over. The groundwork has been laid. And now we will move forward to capitalize on the tremendous potential offered by the ultimate frontier of space. Beginning with the next flight, the Columbia and her sister ships will be fully operational, ready to provide economical and routine access to space for scientific exploration, commercial ventures, and for tasks related to the national security. Simultaneously, we must look aggressively to the future by demonstrating the potential of the shuttle and establishing a more permanent presence in space. We've only peered over the edge of our accomplishment.
Thank you. Mr. President, you mentioned something about people having a desire to maintain a presence in space. Not very many hours ago, I know two guys who really wanted to maintain that presence in space a while longer. That is, you never get tired of it. The most remarkable thing, besides the machine and the team that put it together, is that it's a new discovery every minute and every day. The machine we built is a first stepping stone. Here comes the second one. We're standing in front of its pathfinder, and there's more to come. Where we're going to go in the future is something that depends on you.
And at the end of the day, probably the most spectacular part is the flight of Challenger on its way to join a fleet. And we're no longer going to be a one-ship airline.
Astronauts Tom Mattingly and Henry Hartsfield piloted Columbia on its fourth and final test flight. The spacecraft's nearly flawless performance marked a fitting end to the orbital flight test program, making it possible to certify the Space Transportation System as a fully operational carrier.